Hi everyone, I'm Anvesha and I'm a psychologist. If you're new to my channel, then welcome to Psyche Bubbles. I make videos about psychology and mental health. In today's video, I wanted to talk about emotion regulation because of how important it can be in our day-to-day life. Believe it or not, emotion regulation is something that we use sometimes without even knowing. For example, if we have an important project coming up, and we are feeling really overwhelmed, a lot of us might be able to keep our emotions in check just till the deadline. Maybe we get into a disagreement with a coworker, but we don't really show our feelings in that moment. That is also us using emotion regulation technique. Generally speaking, emotion regulation means our ability to increase or decrease the intensity of whatever we are feeling in that moment. But in the field of psychology, especially therapy, we talk about emotion regulation techniques as ways for us to reduce the intensity of our feeling. And this is what I wanted to talk about a lot more today. If you have watched the previous video, you do know that when it comes to emotions, it's important to remember how complex they are and how they help us communicate our feelings, our thoughts, sometimes without even saying anything. So different parts of our brains come together to manage and control our emotions. So it goes without saying that emotion regulation is not always easy. Back in 1998, studied emotion regulation and grouped the techniques into two parts. One focused on the antecedent, which is the situation before the emotion actually arises. An example could be, let's say we are scared of a public speaking event where we have to talk in front of thousands of people. Antecedent focused emotion regulation technique will tell us to understand what about the future public speaking event is making us anxious now or could make us anxious then. How we are interpreting that event, what meaning we are getting out of it. And then we change the meaning of that event, and maybe the emotions we feel because of it will also change, either in intensity or in type. Carrying on with the example of public speaking, let's say I'm scared of people laughing at me, of making a bunch of mistakes, or not really being able to communicate what I want to say. And because of that, I'm already starting to feel nervous. And I know that as the day goes by and I'm getting closer to the date of the event, my nervousness keeps on increasing and I start feeling really anxious. Now, I could look at the event as a way for me to share my knowledge, of getting to know like-minded people who might share the same sets of interest as I do, of looking at this public speaking event as a way to network with people, to understand other people's opinions about the topic. Now, that could lead to me feeling less anxious, or I could even try to find evidences that would say that A, I would mess up, and B, people would laugh at me. Now, if there are no evidences supporting it, we might give a different explanation of what that event might look like. Sometimes we also call this technique cognitive restructuring. Cognitive reappraisal or simply reappraisal is a great way to regulate our emotions. The second category of emotion regulation that he spoke about was suppression. Suppression simply means that we do not show our expressions or our emotions externally. Let's say when during workplace conflicts, our bosses might say things to us that seems hurtful or very critical. Instead of showing our expressions or what we are actually feeling, some of us might maintain a neutral facial expression. The thing about suppression is that it might work in that moment, but later on, it can affect us negatively. If we continue to suppress our feelings for a long time, it can affect our physical health, it can cause long-term stress, insomnia. It can also damage relationships sometimes because people might take their emotions and put it on someone else, which we call displacement, where if we can't express our feelings in one situation, we take out our frustration in another. Over the years, emotion regulation and what we understand about it has also expanded. Things like breathing techniques, mindfulness techniques, art therapy techniques, or music therapy techniques are all helpful to regulate our emotions, but they don't really encourage to suppress our feelings. In this video, I'll be talking about 5 emotion regulation techniques that don't really encourage to suppress emotions. It is also important to know that emotion regulation focuses on the response itself. It helps to reduce the intensity of our feelings, which means it can be a great way for us to start understanding what could have caused our reactions, what made us feel the way it did. And that is part of emotion processing. Emotion processing and emotion regulation, they are pretty much two sides of the same coin. Before I go ahead and talk about the 5 different emotion regulation techniques, I did want to mention that there are some instances where these techniques might not always be effective. The first thing is, many times we put an expectation on ourselves that if you're using an emotion regulation technique, it has to take our feelings from 10 to 0. That there has to be a drastic change in intensity. Otherwise, we are either not doing it right or the technique is not good enough. But sometimes using emotion regulation technique can take the feeling from, let's say, 10 to 8 or maybe 7. That is enough for us to make decisions to either remove ourselves from that situation or to understand why we are feeling that way. The second instance where emotion regulation might not work is if we try out a new skill while we are in the middle of a crisis. An example that I like to use during sessions is, let's say that I have a work meeting and I'm already getting late. And usually I take this one route that takes a long time, but I have traveled it so often that I know that I'll reach at least 2 minutes before office time. And then there's this other route that has multiple shortcuts, and if I take this, then I'll reach at least 15 minutes before office time. But I've not really traveled through that route at all. Now, when we are getting late, many of us will have the tendency to use the longer route just because we are more familiar with it. Many of us might not want to take the risk of getting lost while finding multiple shortcuts or even getting overwhelmed. Emotion regulation skills are like that. At the end of the day, these are skills that can turn into habits. So it takes time to become comfortable using them more often. We might start using our default coping mechanisms when we are feeling overwhelmed. It's important to give ourselves some grace and kindness and continue practicing those skills until they become second nature. Adding on to this last point, many times we don't really allow ourselves the time or the practice that is needed to become familiar with an emotion regulation skills. And it is important to remember that sometimes an emotion regulation skill might not be for us. For some people, breathing techniques do not work. For some others, the 5-4-3-2-1 technique, which is a very popular grounding technique, doesn't always work either. That doesn't mean that we are doing something wrong. It could mean that maybe for that particular situation, breathing technique might not be an effective solution. Or there's also a chance that we have not really processed our feelings, not really sat with it or understood it well enough, and so emotion regulation techniques might fall short. And that's all right, which is why seeking help through therapy or support groups can be very helpful. Alright, so finally, here are 5 emotion regulation techniques that I want to talk about. The first is one of my favorites that's based on behavioral therapy, and that is called progressive muscle relaxation, or sometimes also known as Jacobson's progressive muscle relaxation. As the name suggests, we focus on particular muscle groups and we tense those muscle groups and purposely relax them. And we do that because a lot of times when we are feeling any emotions, we physically also hold that emotion through tension in our muscle group, tightness in our chest, tightening of jaws, and many times we don't even realize that we are doing that. What progressive muscle relaxation does is it allows us to consciously realize what tensed muscles feel like and what relaxed muscles feel like. And then we go through the process of tensing and relaxing the muscles to purposely let go of any tension from our body. That, in turn, can relax our mind too. It makes it easier for us to understand what we are feeling and to process them even. There are multiple videos demonstrating progressive muscle relaxation. I'll be linking them in the description box below, and it has helped a lot of people, so you guys can check it out too. The next emotion regulation technique that I wanted to talk about is humming. Now, you might have heard of humming through somatic techniques or even through yoga and pranayama. But the thing is, irrespective of where you might have heard it, there are also research papers that talk about the effectiveness of humming. Humming produces vibration in our throat, which can activate the vagus nerve that can lead to feelings of relaxation. For this activity, you can honestly hum a song or just simply take a breath in, and while breathing out, you hum for a while. See if it works for you. I will be linking some of the research papers talking about the emotion regulation techniques in the description box down below so that you guys can read about it too. Third is coloring technique. Coloring can be a very good mindfulness based activity that helps us come back to the present and also regulate our feelings by reducing stress, anxiety, or any other overwhelming emotions. The repetitive motions of coloring can be very calming. There are research work done for children, adults, and teenagers too, where coloring has been shown to be effective in managing our feelings. You don't really need expensive colors or a coloring book. Sometimes you can just use a simple notebook to color whatever you want to. It's not really about how artistic you are, but it is about using different colors that you might want to use. Or you could use different mandala prints. I'll be linking a few free mandala prints from my Ko-Fi page, and you can download them and use them. Or you could also buy different coloring books that you want and use them to color. And maybe you can check in how it feels after a 10-minute coloring session. The fourth emotion regulation technique is a variation of the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding techniques. As a therapist, I've had interactions where people have said the 5-4-3-2-1 technique doesn't always work for them. And that could be because sometimes they get distracted by the number of times they need to see versus the number of times they need to hear things or taste things or smell things. And if this technique works for you, then that's great. But if you find it not being effective or you find it overwhelming to focus on all 5 sense organs, what can also be done is we focus on only one sense organ. It could be things that we want to see or hear or feel. Now, for example, choose to focus on sight. That is, you want to focus on seeing things around you. The purpose of this activity is to inundate your senses. And one way of doing that is, let's say we stand somewhere and we take note of everything that we can see within maybe a room or wherever we are. We look at everything in detail. We look at the texture, we look at the light, we look at the colors, and we try to describe them in vivid details as much as we can in that moment. For some people, sound can be calming. So they focus on that sense organ and they take note of all the things that they can hear. The volume of the sounds, what are the sources of the different sounds that they are hearing, and describing those in details as much as possible. It can be a good way to ground ourselves without feeling overwhelmed by focusing on all the different senses at the same time. And it also helps us feel distracted long enough that our emotions calm down. Yes, grounding techniques can sometimes also help us distract ourselves, but when used together with emotion processing, distractions can be a very good way to regulate our emotions. The final emotion regulation technique is a breathing technique. I do know that I said that for some people breathing techniques might not work, but if you are one of those people who have found breathing techniques to be effective, then you can obviously give it a go. One of the techniques that I like to focus on in session as well is that instead of trying to deep breathe, we try to slow breathe. So we breathe in as slowly as we can, and then we breathe out as slowly as we can. This requires some amount of practice, and I would say that trying to do this technique when we are feeling calm on a regular basis and consistently can help us use it when we are feeling overwhelmed. A really good way to slow breathe instead of focusing on deep breathing can be using box breathing techniques, where we breathe in for 4 counts, hold our breath for 4 counts, then breathe out for 4 counts, and once again hold our breath for 4 counts. I'll be linking a follow along video of box breathing technique that you can use on your own. But this is to say that not every emotion regulation technique might work for everyone, which is why it does help to maybe talk to someone who can help us process our emotions. For some people, reappraising or trying to understand what they're feeling, why they're feeling the way they are, might be much more effective than a lot of the emotion regulation techniques that I have mentioned. This is all for this video. Feel free to leave a comment about whether you have used some of these emotion regulation techniques or if you have used any other emotion regulation techniques that have worked for you personally. I'd love to know about that. For today, that's all. Bye.